Welcome back to Bog Panda. Tonight we're going to talk about something I don't think we've ever discussed on this show before. This is kind of a first for us. We're virgins, so take it easy. Give us something to bear down on because we're going to talk about Doom. I am Dr. Mike at Official Pagan on everything, even threads. Whatever you do on that, go find me on there. And joining me as always.
Hi, everybody. This is Kelly at KELLYTHUL on X, I guess, and Threads and Instagram. Gonna be this whole Twitter thing is super weird. It's super weird. Maybe we'll bog pandas on the issues on that at some point in time. But before we do that, we really appreciate it if you, because that would mean you'd want to subscribe to the channel. You ought to do that. So that when we weigh in on the whole thread X kind of thing, you can hear our deep thoughts on that. So if you want to do that, maybe go through the videos a little bit. Anything you like, let us know by giving us a like, share it with your friends, and be sure to check out our merchandise. We're gonna link to that in the description. And while you're doing all that, you might want some nice, relaxing background noise. There's a hard no playlist, the world's shortest podcast, available to you, and you can have a rich tapestry of a whole bunch of shows, guests on occasion, and you should check it out.
And it is the world's shortest podcast. If you find anything shorter, don't be an asshole and tell us about it. So tonight we're going to talk about Doom. Kelly and I are both big Doom fans. Is that fair to say, sir?
Absolutely.
So if you watch our show, you may be familiar with us talking about this in the past. And spoiler alert, I think you're going to get a special Doom episode from us before the end of the year because it's a special anniversary this year. But I came across this video and I wanted to share it with Kelly because we've talked a lot about Doom. We've talked a little bit about Doom ports, particularly the 3DO and my occasional defense of the 32X1 whenever I can fit it in. This, though, was an interesting video. So we have, and this isn't something that I follow or that I even try and do, but there is a big community of Doom speedrunners. And that's exactly what it sounds like, people. It's people trying to rush through the levels as quickly as possible, often using tricks and secrets and things to get through there as quickly as they can to set records and beat each other's records. And it's crazy. I just can't play that way. That's just not, that's not how I do it. I like the immersive atmosphere of Doom. That's what I liked about Wolfenstein 3D when that came out. It wasn't quite complete, but it was almost there, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. And it took Doom to be the complete immersive experience that I was looking for me. And then, of course, that continued with games like Duke Nukem 3D and Rise of the Triad, which I was a big fan of as well. And so many others that followed after that. But for me, Doom really kicked that off. So I personally have never tried to rush through. I like not going slow, but I take my time, get all the secrets and I just enjoy myself. Like I enjoy playing Doom, just putting it on and burning through a couple of hours playing through Doom. It's a lot of fun. You're not a speedrun guy either, though, right, Kelly?
No, not even close. Because as we've established on previous shows, I have no sense of direction. And that would be a major impediment to being an effective speedrunner. Even with the little cheats that you can kind of do to get off map and get kind of outside of the game, to increase your shorten your time to get to completion. But yeah, I thought this was real interesting. It's on Carl Jupp's YouTube channel. We'll include a link to the video where he kind of goes through the ports. And one of the threads, point for thread, one of the threads that runs through the whole thing is him kind of sharing for each of these ports what the fastest speed run was for the one. So I thought that was kind of a neat way to hang these things together and give you some sort of common measuring stick to kind of at least understand playability, to at least a certain degree, at least how well the controls work.
Yeah, but, and the other part of the theme to this video is it's specifically speed runs of bad ports or disliked ports of Doom. So you're not going to see like PlayStation Doom on here. You're going to see things like Saturn and 3DO Doom on here, which are hated for different reasons. it was really interesting to see, especially because I do feel like some of these ports don't get talked about a lot now, especially like 3DO gets talked about a lot just because it's so infamous and the story behind it and all that craziness. But you don't hear a lot about the Saturn port of Doom. You hear a little bit about the Super Nintendo port, but people don't usually talk about how bad it is, just kind of like the amazement that it ran at all and that it looked like Doom on a Super Nintendo. Um, and that's, to be honest, a stretch if you've ever played it. Kelly, you played it for the first time at my wedding, right? Prior to my
Yes.
wedding or right after my wedding. So
During
you can
your
attest
wedding,
to
actually. Yeah, that
it was
was
during.
during.
That's why the pastor didn't remember you. You were
I
off
had my
playing
head
game.
down.
But you can attest to it not running so well on the Super Nintendo. There was two things that did kind of irk me about this video, though. It starts by mentioning the Jaguar port, but following it up by saying that it was a really good port and it is the basis for literally all of the ports until you get into the Xbox ports of it and stuff like that. That's when they started going back to the actual PC game to do the ports for it. So all of them are based off of that, good and bad. They're all technically ports of the Jaguar version, which was made by id Software themselves. And they made the reason you can tell that they're ports of the Jaguar version is they made changes to the level designs on some of the levels, and that's what carries over in every one. So they're using the source code from the Jaguar game for every port that came out for a while from there. Even elements of that are in this does erroneously say the Super Nintendo port's not based on that. That's not correct. It still pulls stuff from the Jaguar one. Weirdly, though, the Super Nintendo one does put in some things that make it a little bit closer technically to the PC layouts of the levels. It just looks awful and you get stuck on walls if you walk close to them. So, which makes it tough if you're going to try and speed run a game, I would imagine. The Saturn port pretty much just doesn't work. I've never played it. I've seen videos of it though. It's hilariously bad the way that it's almost a slideshow, this sort of jerky movements of everything. For some reason, they didn't let Saturn use their own engine for it and made them go back to the Jaguar port again, which they themselves said, hey, that was a big mistake in software. But it's on there. The other part of it that irked me is it ends with an honorable mention or dishonorable mention for the 32X version. But again, mentions that the game actually plays really well and they just throw it on there so they can make fun of the music, which I totally agree with. That
Yeah,
is
'cause that was, and you have consistently stood up for the 32X version of Doom,
mm,
which I can respect, seeing, given the gameplay of it. But I was blissfully unaware of the horrendousness that is the soundtrack to the
oh
32X.
yeah.
Oh my.
Yeah. So what happened there, for anybody who doesn't know, the Jaguar port, which again is every version of Doom that came after that for a while, the Jaguar port, when they brought it over to Jaguar, there's this subtle misconception that the Jaguar port doesn't have music. It does. They programmed in all the music, but the frame rate wasn't where they wanted it to be. Because remember, this was made by id, so they wanted the frame rate to match or be as close as possible to the PC running on an optimized system. So they wanted really smooth, fast frame rate. And they realized the only way they were really going to get that was to take the music out of the levels. So the music is actually on the cartridge, which is weird. So you can go in, for the people who are smarter than me, can go into the files and all of the soundtrack is there. But the only music that plays during the game is like the in-between level music. And that was because they didn't want any frame rate issues. So they just took the music out. 32X based on the same port. Sega did the same thing. They realized that they were having frame rate issues, so they took the music out of it. Where they screwed up though was they realized that Jaguar wasn't going to have music at all during the game. They couldn't do that either if they wanted it to run as smooth as Jaguar, and it does. It runs incredibly smooth. There's no slowdown. There's no anything. This isn't like any of the other ports that came after, even on more powerful systems like the 3DO and the Saturn. What they did though was the 32X is attached to a Genesis. So they're like, we'll just bounce all the music over to the Genesis and let that play it. The problem with that is it's not the same type of sound card. So what you get is weird facsimile scrambled music playing through the Genesis. And it's not good. It's really, really, really bad. The game would have actually been better if they just left the music out entirely the way that Jaguar did. So they are technically doing the same thing. They took out the music during the levels so that the game runs as smooth as it does, but they used the connection to the Genesis to shoot the music over to the Genesis so there is music. It'd be better off without it.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Or write optimized music for the Genesis.
Yeah, and that's they could have, if they had taken the time, they could have just optimized music for the Genesis, but they didn't. So that's what happens when you do that.
Yeah, and it is a super interesting video. It's the dot I hadn't fully connected was that, particularly if you're a speedrunner, which clarified I'm not, uh, the ability to see kind of strafe and turn at the same time is super helpful. And for a game controller, a lot of times that's going to be your D-pad, which you're using to kind of do your turning. Now, so you double duty is, yeah, I'm turning and strafing, and you start to really kind of limit your ability to do that. So I thought that was pretty interesting on the controller side. I also thought it was very interesting that apparently one of these speedrunner tricks, or there's a couple tricks, and you mentioned one, which is to kind of get yourself blown off the map and take shortcut that way. And all thanks to the rocket launcher, typically. And the other thing, particularly depending on how powerful a system was, it basically said, yeah, so the key here is to look away from the monsters. Try and avoid, just look at walls. I think look away from the monsters could be a good T-shirt for us. So we'll see if we can kind of work on getting that out there.
Yeah, and the reason for that is Doom is not actually a 3D game. And they didn't quite explain this in the video, nor did they have to. But Doom is not actually 3D, it's 2D. And what's happening is every time you move, it's redrawing everything every time you move, which is why the frame rate issues are so bad on most of the console ports, because they're not made to do that. That's not how consoles work. It's not meant to redraw the entire image every single time you move a hair as you're going. So that's why they ran into so many frame rate issues. So the idea is if you're just looking at the wall, it's less for it to draw. So if you stick close to the wall and just kind of strafe through rooms, it's not having to draw the details and characters and stuff over and over again. So you're shaving, fractions of seconds off, which in a speed run is the difference between you breaking a record or not.
Problem I'll never face.
That's also why you get stuck on walls, though, in the Super Nintendo version, because Super Nintendo can't do that. Super Nintendo has a slower, it's 16-bit, just like Genesis, but they chose to go with a slower version of the Motorola 16-bit processor than Genesis and the Amiga used. So while they had a better video card, so more colors and things, and sometimes games had better graphics on there, it's a slower processor, so it couldn't do that. But it did have native scaling and rotation. And this is why you get stuck on walls. So instead of redrawing every frame, it's scaling and rotating the existing frame slightly so that it can skip every few frames to save time and memory. The issue with that, though, is you start to get stuck on stuff because you're not actually moving anything. It sucks. Just turn the music off on 32X and you have the perfect version of Doom.
There you go. Fair enough. Good deal. Or get a Jaguar. Play on
the Jaguar. Have you played it for Jaguar yet?
Through an emulation, yeah. Unlike certain people on this show, I don't have a Jaguar. So
I don't have a physical copy of Doom. It's got to be better through emulation, though. Because I can't imagine the controller working in your favor.
No.
The only positive thing about it, because you have 8,000 buttons on it, it would be the only version of Doom from that era where you can just pick what weapon you want without having to cycle through them.
It's true. I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah, and you can do that on the emulator too. You just use the numbers on the keyboard.
Oh, okay, cool. All righty. So we love Doom. We'll talk about Doom. We'll hear your folks' thought on that. Was there a port here missing? I can't imagine. So he's pretty thorough. I'm kind of covering the ones that were troubled or sometimes not so troubled, but important, like the Jaguar and 32X. So, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Anything else, sir?
No, I think that's it. I mean, obviously, it's a big anniversary for Doom. So expect us to talk more Doom, which I don't think is ever a bad thing.
Nope.
Bog Panda.